Hello everyone. This video is going to be about changing the thermostat housing on a Jaguar XJ, Lincoln LS, or a Ford Thunderbird 3.9 V8. Anyways, this is a Lincoln LS that I'm working on right here. And I've seen a lot of bad advice on YouTube about changing this part. They don't really tell you the dangers about changing this part out. And the issue with changing this part out, there's only 4 bolts holding this thermostat housing in, is the back bolts. This back bolt right here isn't really so much an issue. It's the one right here. You can't really see it, but I'll shine a flashlight in there so you can see that in there. Let's see. It's hard to see, but this plug's in the way. There it is. You can see it right there. It's like halfway under the intake manifold. It's right there. And you could use a ratcheting hand socket, or opened in a ratcheting tool with a flex head, and you could bend it and you could get in there with that part. But they don't tell you the dangers that you could actually strip the heads on those back bolts. And I've done this job before, and I stripped that bolt out. And when you strip that bolt out, you're pretty much screwed, because you're not going to be able to get the bolt out. So you're going to have to change out take off the entire intake manifold, to get to that one little bolt. And the proper way to change out your thermostat housing is to remove your intake manifold. That's the proper way of doing it, because there's no way you could get a socket to sit perfect on top of that bolt without taking that intake manifold off. Even if you use these ratchets, they work. But or you could use a universal joint right here that moves, but you're gonna have a hard time fitting it over that bolt. And the problem is when over time, when the metal gets hot and it cools down, the metal expands and contracts, and it weakens the bolt a little bit, and you could strip it real easy. So my recommendation is to you're gonna have to remove this intake manifold, to take those bolts off, and I think it's a lot faster than trying to fight with those bolts, because I could barely fit my hands down in there. And I was able to do it before like that, but I don't recommend doing it. The proper way to do it is to remove your intake manifold. And if you're not really good working on cars, if you just pay attention to what you're doing, you can pretty much figure it out. Pretty much disconnect anything that's in your way. You got to disconnect your vacuum lines right here. Take off your air intake. Disconnect your plugs, all your plugs. When you take off your intake manifold, your fuel rails are attached to it, so you're going to have to disconnect your fuel line right here. Disconnect it right here. That should be the first thing you do, is disconnect your fuel line, disconnect all your plugs. Me, when I did it before, I took off my throttle body. It's only 4 bolts right here, 8mm. If I'm not mistaken, all the bolts are 8mm. Even the intake manifold bolts are 8mm. So you don't really have to keep changing sockets out. They might be 10, but I think they're 8. Anyway, and there's 10 of them, I think. And you're gonna have to remove this bar right here, you know, disconnect the bolts right here. And you don't have to take the whole thing off, you just swing it to the side to get out your way. Just take the 2 bolts and swing it and move it. Anyways, it looks more complicated than it really is. It just takes a lot of time. But if you have to go to work the next day and your car's overheating and you know that your thermostat housing is leaking coolant, you know, because it's really easy to see. You know, I mean, you could see the little white spots right here. This thing's already been leaking. And, you know, I wouldn't recommend doing it, you know, if you're limited on time. You know, give yourself at least 4 hours, you know what I mean, to do this job. A good mechanic could probably do it in 2. I could probably do it in 2. I've done it in 2, actually. But it's a lot better to take it off than to try to fight with those things, because if you strip them or you drop them, you know, you're pretty much screwed. You know, so give yourself a good window of time, you know, to do it the proper way. You could do it, you know, take the shortcuts and, you know, try to fight with those bolts, but once you strip them, they're done. And if you don't have the mechanical skills to extract strip bolts, I don't recommend doing it. And if you're going to replace this part, to get the proper part. Don't buy the cheap ass Dorman, the Ford parts, because they're plastic. Jaguar, when they put these motors together, the Jaguar cars, they used quality aluminum. You know, look at the quality difference. It's quality. You know, Jaguar didn't care about, you know, the Ford brand, so they gave us cheap ass plastic. You know, but all the parts on a Jaguar are interchangeable with the Lincoln. You know, this car is pretty much a Jaguar car. You know, the frame, the suspension, you know, all the suspension parts are Jaguar parts. This thing handles like a Porsche. One of the best handling cars I've ever had. You know, and it got pretty good power. You know, it's not a slow car at all. It could, you know, I drive on mountain roads all the time, and I could, you know, I could keep up with motorcycles. Anyways, this it's not a, it looks really intimidating when you look at this motor, because, you know, this engine bay, I don't think should have had a V8 in it, you know what I mean, because you don't have room to do anything. And you know, working underneath this thing is even worse. And I changed the starter on this thing before, and that was probably the hardest starter job I ever did in my life. But you know, they're not bad motors. You know, if you know how to wrench, it's the maintenance is real easy to do on these cars. A lot of people are confused about the blading procedures with these cars too. They don't know how to properly blade them. You know, because once you change the part out that was causing you to leak coolant, you have to bleed the motor out every time. Every time you pop off the cap on your degas bottle right there, you have to do a complete bleed procedure every single time. These cars are very low tolerant on air. Any little small pocket of air gets inside the motor, it has to be bled out. And the way to properly bleed these cars is you got to take the cap off your thermostat housing right here, fill it all the way up to where you can't fill it up anymore at all. You know, have it you know, filled up to all the way to the brim. You open that cap up over there, fill it all the way up to the max line. Then you open up your bleeder valve right here with a flathead screwdriver. There's a little slit right here. Take a flathead screw, open it up, turn your heater on full blast all the way up to 90 degrees, and rev your motor to 2,500 RPMs. I recommend jacking your car up or going on a slanted hill when you're doing it, so your front end is more elevated, because when the engine's elevated, it will cause the air to come through the heads a lot faster. And because once you, even if you open up that blitter valve, you still might have a air pocket in the head somewhere. And you drive up a hill, that air is going to rush back out and you're going to overheat again. So the best thing to do is to jack the front end of your car up to where you're like at a 35-45 degree angle, as high as you can get the front end of the car up. Then open up the blitter valve and blade it that way to get all the air out, and it'll alleviate all your overheating issues. The main weaknesses on these motors are these crappy plastic parts. These cars sell for cheap. It's because a lot of the people who own them don't know how to wrench on them, and they keep having to go to mechanics, and the mechanics rip them off. A lot of times you take these cars in with overheating issues, a mechanic will tell you it's a head gasket problem. It's a cracked head. You have a hydraulic fan system on here, and those hydraulic fan systems are about $1,500 new. They're not cheap. But anything on Lincoln or Jaguar, you're going to be paying a lot of money for the parts. But if you're not a wrench like I do, it's a lot cheaper to do the work yourself. I do all my own work when I work on cars, so that's why I'm able to maintain a Jaguar engine. But anyways, when you rev the motor up to 2,500 RPMs, when you have that bleeder valve open, you got to do it for 3 minutes till the engine gets up to operating temperature. And once you feel the heat coming out your vents, when it's really, really hot, then you pretty much know the air is out. Sometimes if you have like a door actuator issue, in your vents, you might have hot air blowing from one side and the other side blowing cool. You can't really depend on the heater as a way of measuring if you have all the air out. So I recommend just following the 3-minute rule and revving up to 2,500 RPMs until you're at temperature, and until you stop seeing bubbles coming out of here. And once you have a nice steady flow coming out, you close the valve up, and that's it. But it's not a hard procedure, but a lot of people don't know it. It's not in the owner's manual how to bleed these cars. So a lot of people throw these cars away because they just don't understand how they work. Anyways, those are my recommendations. Anyways, if you have any questions, leave a comment.